talking Memphis wrestling with Randy Hales and special guests.
Man, I have some energy tonight. Man, am I fired up? Man, I'm ready to go. I want to say hello to the first person in the room, and that is Jeff Frog Wheeler. What is going on? He says it's a good day. I say it's a good day. We all say it's a good day. Greg Wayne is in the house. What is going on, Greg? Also, Randy Lusk, my buddy Al Tuttle, and my brother from another mother, my friend, and I will be talking a little bit later on. Once Michael St. John gets here, I will be talking about some family members, the father-in-law. We'll be talking about the father-in-law of my brother from another mother, Randy Dandy. Randy West is in the house. I'm not going to tell him anything he doesn't already know. By the way, I prep for these shows. By the way, I research for these shows, and sometimes I call and I ask questions. So I sent a text to Randy West to ask Eddie Marlin a question. I sent a text to Diane Marlin West to ask Eddie Marlin a question. I got notes here. I'll come over here. You know, there's some people. Let me show you. I got all kinds of notes. So if Adam went away, if Michael didn't show up, I could talk for hours as long as you guys would help me out. There might be some people on a certain radio show here in Jonesboro, Arkansas, not Brandon Baxter, because Brandon Baxter learned prep from me, ORH, Randy Dandy. But there's some radio stations that don't believe in prep. They don't think prep is good. Then when the dadgum phones don't work, then they don't know what the hell to do. Anyway, that's the way it is, and I'm fired up on April the 11th. Now, Pat Trammell will not be here, I don't think, because he has a meeting in Memphis. Chris Ellis has a hot date, so he won't be here. Now, Michael St. John will be here, but obviously it does not look like he will be here on time because about 5 minutes ago, he said, I'll be on in 15 minutes. Now, Rod W. Robinson in the house. Always, we are praying for Rod with a medical deal that he has coming up. So praying for you as well, Rod. Praying for everybody. PJ, my friend PJ from over the seas in the house. Always good to hear from you and from who else do we have? Brooks Tullis, of course, and Alexander. Alexander, remind me where you are. As he says, I find classic Memphis wrestling more entertaining than AEW, and I think. Here's a fact from me. RH, the owner, the founder, president of Power Pro Wrestling. I am saying Power Pro Wrestling show is more entertaining than anything you see on television today. By gosh, I almost said by God, but then I hate saying that, so I didn't say that. All right, I am fired up today, and here I am. I am by myself for a few minutes, and we have a great subject. Greg, I want you to listen to this subject because like I did yesterday, I showed some video of Buddy Wayne knocking the crap out of Kevin Christian. I wish he would have done it for real. I wish he would have, when he nailed him, I wish he would have knocked him out. I wish he would have busted his nose. I wish he would have blackened his eyes. I don't like Kevin Christian very much. Can you tell that? There's a lot of people I don't like, but there's a lot of people I do like, and there's people that's on this show tonight and watching this show tonight that I appreciate every one of you. My producer, Adam Dunn, in the Peachtree State of Georgia. Let me tell you what Adam Dunn did. He was in Memphis with some family friends for Easter, but Saturday afternoon, he made the 1 hour trip from Memphis, Tennessee to Jonesboro, Arkansas, and he came to see me. And I took him out. We went to the Blue Ember and we had a smoked turkey sandwich and it was good. And he had a baked potato and I had a baked potato and corn on the cob and it was good. And then I had to get something out of it. First of all, we watched some wrestling. We watched WrestleMania. We watched 2 matches. Dominic Mysterio against Rey Mysterio, and he liked that very much. Then we also watched Cody and Roman Reigns, and he absolutely loved that for sure. Andrew Calvin Jr., the owner, founder, and president. I love it. Al Tuttle is saying hello to Rod, and Greg Wayne is saying hello to Rod. And Alexander is from Fall River, Massachusetts. My niece Tracy, who was born on my 3rd birthday, lives in Cape Cod. Cape Cod. Cape Cod. Hey, the mayor, John McCall, who Sunday night I spent 2 hours recording for his show, his debut 2 episodes of his podcast was with Downtown Bruno, the 3rd, and I told stuff that I haven't told before. I knocked a little bit, and I told some stuff that I just hadn't said. I should say that for my own damn show. But anyway, it was very, very interesting as well as we talked. This is what you call a stretch. This is what you call wasting time, trying to be entertaining at the same time. I know you guys would like this. So I went to Popeyes today, and I had some fruit punch, non-alcoholic fruit punch. You know what's strange? I've been in this apartment since September. And I've lived in houses, and I've owned my houses, and I've rented houses, and I've rented apartments, all the things. Living in a lot of different places. But I can tell you right now, the one thing that I'm not used to about this apartment, I don't know, Adam, if you ever noticed this. I'm sure you've opened my refrigerator to get a bottle of water or whatever. There's no ice maker in the refrigerator. I have no ice. Zero ice. So I'm asking everybody as I'm saying hello to Melinda Patterson, who Greg's saying hi to as well. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Have you ever rented a place? Have you ever bought a place and there's no ice maker in the refrigerator? What about it, people? It's a inquiring minds, and we need to know that. And what is Alexander saying? Or Kenny Omega as the USWA Unified World Champion? I'm telling you, Omega, and I like Omega a lot better than Jim Cornette does. But Kenny Omega, even as good as he is now, would have been underneath. He wouldn't have been a top guy. He damn sure wouldn't have been the Universal Champion. And his style then wouldn't have got over. And from what I see about Kenny, he has in his mind, it's why Harley Race, for Christ's sakes, didn't like Kenny Omega's ass. Because he was dangerous and he didn't listen to the veterans. And if he wouldn't have listened to the veterans here, that's where it's different now. That's where it's different there. Because back then, if you didn't listen to the veterans, Greg Wayne, if you didn't listen to Joe LeDuc, what do you think would have happened? You'd have got your ass kicked. If you didn't listen, or if you try to be big shot to Mick Tierney, what do you think would happen? You would get your ass kicked. Same thing with Kurt Angle and so many others. It is. It's what it is. For sure, there's no doubt about it in the world. Now, Ahmed, answering the refrigerator thing, said when he got married in first apartment, had an ice maker. My first apartment did too, but my current one does not. I don't know what the heck is going on. I don't know what's going on. Now, Ahmed, I'm so fired up and and been rambling on. Ahmed, you saying you've never heard of that. What have you never heard of? Remind me what I said to reply to you saying, what made you say that? Now, Alexander says the Young Bucks make PG-13 look at Demolition. So you're a Kenny Omega fan, but you're not a Young Bucks fan, and I'm not a fan of any of them. Al Tuttle says, how do you think Roman would have done in Memphis? I think Roman would have done great. I think he would have been fantastic. Fantastic. I think Randy Orton would have been fantastic. I think Cody Rhodes would have been fantastic. Could adapt and fit in the style. I don't know about Kevin Owens. I don't know about Sami Zayn at all. I don't know if they could have adapted. I think the Usos could have adapted back in the day for sure. As Amon says, haven't heard of not having an ice maker. Well, I'm used to it now. I am used to it now. And I am going to real quick look at my email to see if Michael St. John is telling me he's not going to be here, and he's not telling me that. So I think he'll be here in just a few minutes. William Brooks says, Randy, it's Willie B. All right, Willie B and John McCall, Mayor McCall, that I did that podcast. Now go ahead and write that down, Willie, the name of that podcast and wherever they can find it. You have Bruno, then coming up in a week or two, maybe 2 weeks, you have me. So let everybody know where you can check out the name of the podcast and where you can get it. Alexander says, how would CM Punk, Leo Shaw, I don't even know who that is. Liv Morgan, I don't know who that is. Seth Rollins would have been great. I think Sammy would have been the type of heel kind of like Brian Christopher was. I think he would be good. CM Punk would be great as well. Now, Rod says, I'm asking because I truly don't know, is the Mid-South Coliseum still standing? And yes, it is. It hadn't been used in a long time. Randy Myers says, Heidi, hey, I was cranky when I started up today. By the way, Randy Myers, I might have knocked a little bit, and you probably know why I would have knocked a little bit. And I did knock a little bit. But anyway, it is what it is. We can tell you the truth, Bud and Randy. Don't give a shit if I knock or not. Don't give a shit if I do the show one more time at all. Anyway, Toby Ortman says, hey, Randy, good to see you. Good to see you as well. Now, Michael St. John has written me a little message. He's on the thing. I don't see his face, but I just see him. We have great subject, and Adam, why don't you smart me up by audio or on camera? Tell me what's going on.
I was just telling Michael that I don't see him in preview, and he said he's on Firefox. He's going to swap over to Chrome and see if that fixes it.
We got a great show today, folks, because we are going to rank. We're going to talk about the best wrestling promoters, the worst wrestling promoters. We're going to have a extensive list. Some of you might have seen on my Facebook page where I posted a bunch of pictures, and we can really, for sure, without a doubt, get heavy duty in the subject of the best and worst promoters. And I want everybody to join me for the ride, and I want everybody's comments as well, for sure. No doubt about it. Let's see. What is Randy? Yeah, I know it wasn't you. I know it wasn't you. No doubt about it, for sure. Anyway, I know what I would have done even 5 years ago. But I'm not going to do that now. Not going to do that now. All right. Here we go. And we have so much to talk about. I'm so excited to talk about the great promoters, the bad promoters, the shitty promoters. It's going to be a very great thing. But we want to get the first take from Michael St. John and want to welcome him to the show today, as it's just me and Michael. Me and Michael St. John today. Hey, Michael, what is your first take of the day? It can be wrestling, it can be politics, but don't go too heavy. It can be what's going on in the world. It can be anything. First take from Michael St. John on April the 11th, 2023.
My first take, it's always great to be with you, Randy, and thank you very much. Adam, thank you for the help. Interesting day today. You know, a thought crossed my mind, and the thought was, have you been aware that over the last 3 weeks, as we come on this show, we have had to talk about tragedy, shootings, and they've all occurred in the Memphis territory.
In our dadgum backyard. Yes, sir.
Exactly. And just yesterday in Louisville, where I'll be live on Monday and Tuesday from the AT&T morning line, we're staying at the Galt House, the events at the Churchill Downs Museum. We're staying 4 blocks away. I know exactly where that bank is. You know, I every week we say how heavy our hearts are, how hard it is on us. I've had very deep conversations with several people, both older people and younger people within the last few days. And everybody seems to agree that there's a problem going on right now in these mass shootings and this. What have we lost? We have lost. Have we lost our soul in America? Have we gotten so me-oriented that we don't really care about it as long as it's happening to somebody else and not happening to us? I mean, we're always there with our prayers, and gosh knows those are very, very important. But I think we've come to a time in America today that we've got to do more than prayers. And I picked up the phone today, and I called Bob Adderholt's office, and Congressman Adderholt represents the 4th District in Alabama. He's a great guy. He's been a good friend of mine for many years. I called his cell phone, and unfortunately it went to voicemail. I don't know if Congress is in session or not, but he'll call me back. And I'm going to just mention to Congressman Adderholt is that we seem to be all saying the same thing, but we're not doing anything. And whether that's politics or whether that's we don't know what to do, and it may be a combination of both, or it may be neither. But I think we've come to a point in our country, that in America, and this is getting close to home, Randy, and Adam, you guys in Chattanooga, you guys have been through it. Louisville, Nashville, Huntsville, Memphis. It's just sad. And I'm a very conservative person, and I believe in the Second Amendment. And I heard a friend of mine, that is a former NBA player, to say something that I thought was very, very astute this week. And he said that guns don't kill people, and he admits that and agrees to that. And I think we all know that guns don't kill people. People kill people.
Now look at your
So what are we going to do about the people problem? Go ahead,
Michael.
Randy.
We're showing a picture, thanks to Adam, real quick, as put a picture from Main Street yesterday, Louisville, Kentucky, and that a picture sometimes worth more than the words we can say. And I would just like to say, Michael, that in 3 minutes, once that 911 call at that bank in Louisville, Kentucky, within 3 minutes, the police officers were there. One of the officers just graduated from the police academy on March the 31st, and he's in critical condition the last I checked, but he's still alive.
That's
and
correct.
That was probably his first call, maybe ever, certainly his first in that sort of thing. So we are asking, and it's going. You're right. It's going to take more than prayers, but at the same time, the families of the victims and that officer and that 62-year-old banker and the other 60-year-old guy and the 50-year-old bank person. Just think of them, people. Absolutely think of that as Reese from Kentucky is saying that officer was just on the job for 9 days. And Michael, that's what got me more than anything, that new officer. And boy, he didn't. He got the call, and one of the first persons in, no reservations. You got to admire that.
None whatsoever, Randy. And I got to tell you that, you know, our son, Melanie and our son is a police officer for 6 years in Huntsville. And, you know, he was on the West Precinct. He was, when he first started, he was out west on the west side of Huntsville on the West Precinct for years and second shift. And then he transferred because Joshua was born. And as he got older, he wanted to spend more time with Joshua, and he knew that would be in the afternoons. And he was transferred from West Second to North First, North Precinct first shift. Had Cody been on that call 2 weeks ago today in Huntsville, had he still been in West Second, he'd have probably been the guy involved. And he would have certainly responded. So that hit very, very close to home. And I had a conversation with him over the weekend as a police officer. And he's worried. He's concerned. He's concerned because the ranks of the police officers are dwindling, not only in major cities, in big towns, Memphis, Nashville, Louisville, but in towns like Huntsville and Chattanooga and even smaller towns. And we need our police officers because they are the ones that are the law. They represent the law. And you're right. I pray for them. And I'm not diminishing the prayer at all. Golly, Pete, on our knees every night, please, dear God. But maybe we should ask God to lead us and show us what we need to do to correct the problem. But I hate to start on a somber note, but folks, the folks that are listening, and especially folks here in the United States and in other countries, I know you don't have it maybe it's there, but we don't hear about it as much. Folks, call your congressman, get on the phone. They're easy to get a hold of, even if you get their assistant, and just let them know that we're concerned. I mean, we don't have to be opinionated. They've got to figure it out. They're in a better place to figure it out than me and you. But let's ask them to get off. We've been saying, hey, something needs to be done. Something needs to be done. My deal this week is get off your ass and do something. And I don't care if you're a governor, you're a senator, you're a mayor, you're a House of Representatives member, whatever you are, get off your duff and let's get something done that's going to help at least try to stem this control. But again, my deal is I'm a psychology major. I will tell you, it's a people problem. It's not that we've got too many guns or we don't have enough guns or we don't have this type or that type of guns. I can set a gun on this table right here in front of me, Randy, and leave it here until we get off the air tonight. And I guarantee you that gun's not going to shoot nobody.
Right.
It's not going to jump off that table and hit me or you. So I'm just asking our listeners to be proactive and to pray. Those are the two things I'm asking. Now,
good word from Michael St. John. It's about time to talk some Memphis wrestling and talk professional wrestling in general. And we're going to take a little time out, and we'll be back with that talk as we talk wrestling promoters, also talk a little All In, and we'll be back with that in just a minute.
Living the Dream, Memphis Wrestling, The Randy Hale Story, is available now at randyhalesmemphiswrestling.com.
You know, the subject today, I was so blessed that Michael is with me today because he's going to miss a few times in the next couple of weeks. But as we talk and we rank the best promoters, the worst promoters, it's a lively talk, and we're going to go deep diving into that in just a few minutes. And that's a very, very important subject. It might be 2 episodes, but since we don't have Michael next week, I want to finish it up if humanly possible today as we talk to promoters. But I wanted, as always, we talk about current wrestling, and one of the biggest news that was announced last Wednesday, it was after our show last week, but last Wednesday, Tony Khan at AEW Wrestling, this has been the talk of wrestling, and certainly Jeff Jarrett listened to his podcast today. For the first time since 1992, a professional wrestling event will be in London, England, at Wembley Stadium. Remember the classic 1992 Bret Hart, Davey Boy Smith match that was absolutely great, and the most ambitious event of their history. All Elite Wrestling presents that night at Wembley Stadium on August the 27th. Now, my real quick thoughts about that, I'll give you the positives right now for sure. First of all, the event is the first time event that AEW has been to London. Second of all, it's the first time that a professional wrestling event from the United States has been at Wembley Stadium. The third thing is that the AEW actual rating, their time slot for the TV show, they certainly don't have the history that the WWE does, being around for the last 70 years. But AEW gets better ratings of their show. Now, they set it up for 90,000 people for SummerSlam. However, you can scale it any way you want to scale it. They could scale it for 50,000 or 60,000, and that would look good. But it just proves, Michael, that right now, today in 2023, this whole show, the basis of this show is talk about the glory days of wrestling. I can't tell you when professional wrestling and some of the stuff, I realize you can't call it that anymore, but they call themselves, and they have a wrestling ring, and the wrestlers, some of them wear wrestling boots and wear wrestling tights, some of them don't. But anyway, look at what just happened with the WWE sale. Look at how much money the WWE, look how much money they made last weekend for WrestleMania. As I was listening to Jeff today, and he said one of the most positive things, and I realize he works for AEW, but I'm telling you, wrestlers from both countries, both companies, major companies, both think like this, Michael, whether you like AEW or not, for the health, the future of the business, and for the future of the boys, man, used to be, and Jeff was talking, there was no place to go. I mean, you couldn't go to Vince and say, I don't like that direction. I don't like that opponent. I don't like that finish. I'm not doing it. Well, where else are they going to go? Vince said, well, you don't do it. I'm not changing it. You don't do it, you're fired. Well, they're not going to give up a high-figure job for that. The business, from a financial point and for content, there's more ways to watch wrestling than ever before. It's just exciting times, and we might not like everything we see, but Jeff was strong in his feelings. We're approaching a boom period, money-wise, better than anything we've ever seen in history. Let's keep this short, as we have a long list of promoters to talk about. Your thoughts about All In Wembley Stadium on August the 27th.
I think Tony Khan is one gutsy guy. And, England is hot and cold on wrestling. It always has been. It has not been a country where wrestling just, always flourished and always flourished. It's been up and down, up and down. So to see him go in at this point in time, I also think this also is a statement at the WWE and the new ownership of the WWE is, you may have paid 150 billion, quadrillion, majillion dollars for what you bought, but we're going to be around and we're going to come after it, and we're going to go after it as best we can. I admire him for doing it. It's a hell of a shot. I want to say something though. When you mentioned Jeff Jarrett, I've noticed a change, and it may not, and I don't know if it's just me because I wanted to see it or it's happening, but I think the wrestling program has gotten better for AEW, and I'm talking about the Wednesday night show, since Jeff has been there. And I think Jeff brought more credibility than any other superstar they have signed to date, because not only is he a great worker, Jeff's got a business mind for the business, and he has got a creative mind for the creative side, but he also is respected by that locker room from the minute he walked in the door. And I'm seeing and I'm calling it a maturation, a maturity starting to take place in AEW, and that's not bad.
No, and I agree with you. I think certainly from a wrestler standpoint, Chris Jericho, big star, Daniel Bryan, a big star, CM Punk, absolutely one of the best ones, but nobody brought to the table. Jeff Jarrett started his own promotion. He did with TNA. So he knows what worked and what didn't work and know how to avoid the thing. And Adam, real quick, if you would.
Third generation, by the way, wrestling knowledge there. Third generation. Because you think about it.
Yeah.
Eddie Marlin, Jerry, Jeff.
And you have to, as far as the Eddie and Christine, because Christine might not have been a booker, but she was certainly a wrestling promoter. We'll get to her in a minute. Adam, throw me some stuff up on the screen, and I apologize for not dealing with it so far, but we certainly wanted to talk about that Louisville situation. And as now we start the show, we wanted to deal with the AEW. I think it's big. And I will ask a question in a few minutes, and I'm waiting for Adam to put some of the comments, if he can, up on the screen. Here is one. Scott's Art says wrestling today is horrible. Look at the wrestling company champion out here and compare them with the 80s. And I've said, you're wrong. It's not horrible if they're making millions of dollars. It's just not horrible. It's not what we grew up in. And most of the time I agree that I don't like it. I really do agree with that. But to say it's horrible and then there's billions of dollars at stake and the wrestlers are making more money, go to Cody Rhodes and say wrestling's horrible now. Go to Roman Reigns. It's just not. It's different, but it's absolutely not horrible.
Randy, can I add a point there? And I agree with
you. As long as you agree with me.
I do agree with you, but let me ask a question here. Where is this money coming from? I mean, yeah, they're TV rights, and there's the gimmicks to, the old card table with the gimmicks on it at the back of the arena has now become a multi-million-dollar industry online. But what was it, $20 billion or $18 billion for WWE? Where's it coming from? Now, I know Tony's got a bankroll behind him, and God bless him, he's on strong footing there. But sooner or later, some of this money's got to be paid back. And I'm sorry, but those are figures well beyond my pay scale.
Let's examine that real quick. The WWE, because the infrastructure is so set up, they did $20 million for the weekend just in sponsorships. At the same time, they did in the 3-day period, they did $23 million in ticket sales. And the television right deal with Fox was worth $1 billion. Just the old deal that was great for us, the live event business and the ticket sales, and that was the revenue, and you had to pay for your TVs in most territories. It's all gone. And so, does it matter? Does it matter if you're not doing 10,000 people or 7,000 people with the Mid-South Coliseum every Monday night, or does what matter is what the talent is getting paid and what profit? Obviously, Vince was able to make this merger deal that is absolutely just amazing.
And it's amazing how he came out in it, because he came out on top.
Yeah,
Vince himself.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. So I just read one or two things, folks. If I'm not purposely ignoring your comments, I'm really not. We're just going fast paced here, and a lot of people have their opinion, and I appreciate it very much. A lively discussion there. We're going to take it back old school, and we're going, after we talked about the Louisville shooting and we talked about AEW in London, I'm really excited about where the world of wrestling is. That merger is exciting. It's just the unknown. I'm wanting to know if AEW and Wimbledon or Wembley Stadium, what's interesting is the Cons have homes there and have a soccer club there and have great connections there for sure, as the soccer team plays in Wimbledon. So they're probably getting a sweetheart of a deal.
Well, next door to Wembley Stadium is Wembley Arena.
Right, but that's
a 14,000 seat event center. But this stadium, I've been in Wembley Stadium. It's square and it's huge because the field is a soccer field. And you can put, somebody mentioned that they try to get it down to 20,000. You put 20,000 in Wembley Stadium and you could bowl and not hit anybody. I mean, that's how massive it is.
Scott's Arts is making a product doesn't equal a solid profit. Tell that to the talents that's making millions of dollars. It's not your style, and I get it, because it's not my style at all. To say wrestling is horrible, I mean, dead wrong, because different generation, different audience that you have, younger people and all. Pro wrestling hadn't, certainly in the ring, has it been better? Yes. Has there been more characters? Yes. But the business is about money. To me, it's about money. And to Vince McMahon, it's about money. It's not what we grew up with, but certainly now if WWE and AEW voted tomorrow, I'm saying, well, I would think, well, they voted because they done killed the business, or Tony Khan killed his business. But that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen at all. We're going to stop the debate, not that we won't bring it back up, but we're going to talk about another era. And we were going to talk about everybody's favorite era. And we are going to talk about territory promoters. And I want to explain something to start off with. And I can tell you, we're going to say best promoter, worst promoter, blah, blah, blah. And it's all relative. It's all opinion. It's all opinion. And I have certainly a biased opinion who I think is the best promoter and the best booker of all time is Jerry Jarrett. And we'll put Jerry Jarrett, who we lost on Valentine's Day, we'll put his picture up there right now. And it's so sad that we lost Jerry February the 14th, 2023. But we all have to learn. And Jerry Jarrett had the break because of the fact of he was born the son of Miss Christine Jarrett. Miss Christine, a lovely lady and a tough lady, probably the toughest dead-gum woman I've ever seen in my life. As we switch to the picture of Christine Jarrett, as she became a ticket seller, then a bookkeeper, then the right-hand person of Nick Gulas and Roy Welch, who preceded Jerry Jarrett, who started booking in 1969. Love that picture. Now, keeping the picture up, the way once Jerry Jarrett started his company, and this had happened with Nick and with other wrestling promoters or owners. Jerry Jarrett from 1977 on owned Jarrett Promotions. Before that, Nick Gulas and Roy Welch owned Gulas Welch Wrestling. They would have office towns. Now, in the Jarrett era, the office towns was Memphis, Louisville, Evansville, and Nashville. You ran 6 or 7 nights a week, and there was spot show promoters, we called them, and Christine Jarrett in Indiana and Kentucky would run spot shows. We had clips of last night. He was inducted recently in the Memphis Wrestling Hall of Fame. One of the spot show promoters in the Memphis area in Jackson, Tennessee was Buddy Wayne. Buddy Wayne was one of the spot show promoters as well. And how this worked, the spot show promoter would be at risk. The spot show promoter would pay either a 10% or a 15% booking fee to Jarrett Promotions or Gulas Welch Promotions, 10%. Also, then they would send back to the office 30% of the ticket sales back to the office, and the office would figure the payoffs. Now, they would also have to pay the athletic taxes and city, whatever taxes, you would have to do that. And then, so say it's the $5,000 house, and you take everything out, including the booking fee. So $5,000 house, 10% booking fee is $500. Say the profit of the town is $1,000. So that $1,000 after everybody's paid would go to Buddy Wayne, Eddie Marlin, or Christine Jarrett for sure. Now, certainly, as we'll get to Michael St. John in a minute, Michael, I just wanted to give some background information, then you reply to everything that I said. The other spot show promoter was my man, my mentor, the guy, if it wasn't for Eddie Marlin, steady Eddie from Hendersonville, Tennessee, there would be no Randy Hills. This picture was in 2019, and Eddie had a medical situation at home, and I called the ambulance, and Randy West and I did, and got him to the hospital. He ended up passing away on August the 15th, 2019. Eddie Marlin was born on August the 13th, 1930, and he passed away at 89 years old. Eddie married his wife, old Norma, in June of 1949. Now, Eddie had 2 daughters. Eddie and Norma had 2 daughters, Deborah, who married Jerry Jarrett, and Diane, who married the great TV producer and my good buddy, Randy West. Deborah married Jerry in 1972. Eddie had worked at, I believe it was Gates Rubber Company. It was Gates something or another in Nashville, Tennessee. Was a part-time wrestler, started wrestling in the 50s, but Jerry Jarrett talked him into becoming full-time in wrestling, and Eddie bought the promotional rights for Tupelo and for Jonesboro, Arkansas, and the rest is history. So that's a setup that I don't think the fans No, the actual, of course, it was Jarrett Promotions, but at the same time, a big part of that, Michael, was Christine, Buddy, and Eddie, because you had to have a Friday town, and you had to have a Saturday town, and sometimes you had to have a Sunday town, and so those were the spot shows, and without it, that's 3 less days that the boys don't give payoffs. And the boys come to the territory expecting to make money. And even though Louisville's good, Memphis was good, these towns were great, you needed these spot shows. That was the lifeblood of the company. So your thoughts on what I've said the last 10 minutes?
Well, first of all, on the spot show things, you got to realize too that a lot of the underneath card people really had to have that to live, because back then, I mean, you didn't have anybody quote unquote under contract until later with Jarrett or whatever. So they came in and they did, X amount of time. In certain situations, if a star was over in the territory big time, they might settle down, a la Tojo Yamamoto, Bill Dundee for a certain amount, although he left the territory and came back. But the talent needed that. You're absolutely right. I want to say 2 things. Number one is when you were running down the cities, you left out Birmingham and you left out Chattanooga, which were also money-making cities up to a point, perhaps not to the level of Memphis and Louisville and even Nashville, but they were money-making.
Yeah, at that point, I was just talking once Jerry Jarrett took over.
Gotcha.
At that point, you're correct, though.
And the other thing,
and Lexington, Kentucky was a monthly town that was an office town that was successful. Exactly. Now, who was Nick Goulas' spot show promoters? Can you answer that question? Because I don't know.
Well, when I came aboard, Tom Ernesto was doing some of that. Len Rossi was still involved a bit in doing some of that. To be honest, Nick and George, in fact, George probably did as many spot show promoting towns for Nick, because Nick kept it, very close to the vest at that point in time. And again, this wasn't the most successful time of Goulas Welch Enterprises with Roy passing a year or two before, or a few years before. So that was, that was a more, I think Jerry allowed the talent to be more free to do spot shows. And when I was involved with Jarrett, with Jerry, a lot of the spot shows that would come up, especially up around Louisville, would be done by members of would be done by some of the boys. I know Ricky Morton did a couple of shows up in that area. Bill Dundee, Cordell, Indiana. I can vouch that Bill Dundee ran, because he'd come up at me and say, "Hey, Michael, really push Cordell, because that's my town." So some of the boys were getting involved too. But
they're making good money. As we'll get back to that subject, I put Al's comment on the screen. I want you to read it, then I want you to comment to this, because this is directed to you, and I just don't know. So go ahead and read Al's message that I put on the screen.
I see that, and a great story about Eddie Marlin. And I've seen Eddie was one of these guys. Eddie would help anybody. And that's a typical Eddie Marlin. I mean, I could see him folding up chairs and helping the boys get out of there quicker and so forth and so on. That's just Eddie. And you know that as well as I do, if not better, Randy. Eddie Marlin also had a brother, though, that perhaps gets overlooked, and was one of the referees in the territory, and was the man I paid my taxes to for 20 years in Hendersonville, Tennessee.
I bet my producer, Adam Dunn, can find quickly. Tell everybody about Eddie's younger brother, referee Thomas Marlin.
Tommy Marlin was as great of a guy as Eddie was. Tommy was a little bit more on the business side, and of course was the tax assessor, tax collector in Sumner County in Tennessee for over 20 years. He worked at times. In fact, I think a couple of times back in the days when I was watching wrestling here in Huntsville, I saw Eddie and Tommy Marlin as a tag team wrestle a couple of times. But he became more so as the referee. He would be a special referee after he got elected. He didn't do as much on the wrestling side, but would at times be a special referee for a big match. I know Nick used him in Nashville at one time, and I want to say it wasn't Harley. I'm trying to think who he brought in. It may have been Andre, and it was a big special match. And I forget but Eddie Marlin was the special referee. Or excuse me, Tommy Marlin was the special referee, and that's a shot of Tommy right now. And I believe that's against the French
Tojo.
Angel or one of the Von Brauners, maybe.
Is that not Tojo?
Is it Tojo?
It's hard to tell.
He has more hair. The reason I say that, he has more hair on his arm than Tojo had.
Yeah, you might be right. And I don't know who that referee is. I'm so glad that you brought up that Thomas Marlin, Tommy and Eddie, and of course, Thomas Marlin, Uncle Thomas to Diane and Deborah. Thomas, just a great guy. And both those Marlin guys, Michael St. John, would fight you in a heartbeat. Absolutely. Tough son of a gun.
You got that right. They had more backbone than most of us, more spine than most of us have, for sure. And they were I'll tell you what, if somebody came after me or wanted to fight, I'd want Eddie and Tommy in my corner. I mean, they were absolutely tremendous. But that, getting back to what you were telling about the territory and the spot shows and all, I mean, that really played into it as far as a base salary for the talent, and then those spot shows would be just a little bit more. And a lot of the talent would like to do spot shows, not only to wrestle in the town, but the town didn't get wrestling that much. So the gimmick tables, the souvenir tables were always hot on the spot shows.
Yes, sir. Now, bless the Hills' hearts, because back in those days, they couldn't sell, didn't want to come, they were so into what they were doing, and they weren't going to sell pictures. But yeah, it was a lucrative thing, and Eddie Marlin and Buddy and Christine Jarrett all made great thing. Buddy ran a lot of Mississippi towns. He ran for a long time, Buddy, and we'll do a show on Buddy sometime and maybe have Greg on. There's a big history of Buddy promoting in different territories and a long career. It's just a interesting situation, but I don't think we ever discussed. We've talked Gillis and Welch, and we talked Jerry Jarrett, but we hadn't broke it down. I remember, Michael, the first spot show that I ever ran was in I believe it was in 1985. Not sure. I'm pretty sure it was 1985, because Eddie Marlin said, "Hey, Randy, you can make some money if you go to within 30 or 40, 50 miles of Jonesboro and find a town." Well, I found a town about 20 miles from Tuckerman, Arkansas. It was a small town called Grubbs, Arkansas. The town had a population of 300 people, but Randy Savage in a Southern Heavyweight Championship match against Jerry Lawler. Now, the population of the town was real low. We packed that gym and sold it out, turned away, and probably did, in a town with 300 people, we probably had 1,200 people in the building. Back in those days, that Ron Fuller has told stories about that on his podcast. You go to a town, maybe 150 people in the town, but all the surrounding areas, they got your TV. You could make money. I remember Dutch Mantell, for the longest time, I had that poster, but I don't have it anymore. But that's my first spot show, and certainly we ran it as a Eddie town, so Eddie probably gave me a couple $100, but I was thrilled to death with that.
A couple of questions. First of all, whoever ran Paragould, Arkansas? Because I remember on TV that must have been a hot spot show town, because we promoted Paragould, Arkansas many times on Saturday.
Back in the day, would either run Paragould High School or Greene County Tech High School. Now, right now, they're across the street from each other, but it was separated a little bit. Originally, I think it was a Eddie town. Maybe Buddy could have run it. Christine didn't come this way. Sometimes Eddie would run Indiana and Kentucky. Sometimes Buddy would too. Christine would never come to West Tennessee.
One of Miss Christine's towns was Glasgow, Kentucky. I think that was one of her towns that she ran. I know from doing the rundowns on with Randy West. She'd be running Scottsville and Glasgow, Kentucky, and it'd always be mentioned to me. That's one of Miss Christine's towns, so give it a little extra pump. And those spot shows, though, Randy, I think that's sort of a hidden gem of the territories that nobody ever talks about anymore.
Another town that Christine ran in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and another one was run several with a bigger building in a bigger town, and not that far from Evansville. Do you remember? Speak on Owensboro and kind of the Evansville end of the territory, because you had Louisville, then 130 miles or so to Evansville, and then you had Owensboro, you had Hopkinsville, you had Madisonville. Remember Madisonville,
and you also had sometimes they'd run Paducah in the Paducah territory. There was a thing I remember, and Jimmy Cornette was clear on this. He and I talked about this one time, that Evansville area was sort of cloudy. When I say that, because some of the Indianapolis TV got down into Owensboro and Evansville. And there was either Terre Haute, it may not have been Terre Haute, it may have been Vincennes had a TV that got in there. And the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder at one time had their programs on TV in that area. And so that would be a whole different batch of wrestlers than what the Goulas Welch or the Jerry Jarrett side would be. But yeah, and those southern Kentucky towns, those were hotbeds. Cadiz, Kentucky. I can remember promoting wrestling in Cadiz, Kentucky, and talking about that. And a lot of those shows, a lot of them were sellouts. They got to a thing where the fire marshal would show up and they'd keep him out of the building because they didn't want the fire marshal to see how many people they had shoehorned in that building.
I think we did a pretty good job, and Michael and I both are going. Now, I'm not positive who Michael. My favorite wrestling promoter of all time, personally, is Eddie Marlin. The owner of the company, Jerry Jarrett, I think is the best, and I think from as far as booking, from '69 to maybe he did some good stuff in '87, and that was a pretty good year at all. But we want to talk about other territories as well, and I want to explain certainly, and in one way I want to finish this today, Michael, and we're an hour into this program already, because I like for you, because honestly, of the panel, me and you have the most knowledge on everybody that we're going to talk about. Now, certainly Pat can help out as far as Georgia that he grew up in. I want to talk about Vince McMahon, the one they called Vince Sr., even though he wasn't officially a senior. It's Vincent James McMahon. He was born in 1914. He passed away in 1984 at age 69 years old. And he first showed up in the Washington, D.C. area. He called his wrestling company Capital Sport, ended up expanding. He lived in New York City at times between that and his summer home in Florida. So Vincent James McMahon, 1914 to 1984, he died at 69 years old of cancer. In 1982, he sold his company to his son, and this is the most recent picture we have of Vincent K. McMahon, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, with his new look. So if we have the picture of Vincent Kennedy McMahon, we know who that is, and that's the Clark Gable look. And as we come back to us right now, and the thing that we're going to talk about is that was a big area and a big money territory, just like the next person we'll talk about in a few minutes is Verne Gagne in the Midwest. Big territories their type of wrestling, me as a kid growing up and watching the WWF and watching the AWA, it was boring wrestling, man. I'm thinking that's not the good wrestling that I'm used to. And so the place that even back then, before the national expansion, wrestlers, it's all about money. And I think fan bases don't think that, but it's like that in any sport, basketball, football, baseball.
It's a business.
It's a business. And I think, and I understand that why fans would think that. And I will, even though I haven't made my living out of wrestling since 2001, I always think money. But we got a lot to get through, so I want your quick thoughts on James McMahon and Vincent Kennedy McMahon, and we're going to wait to the end before we rank them. So just your quick thoughts on those two.
Vince McMahon Sr., of course, like you said, started in Washington and he went up north. I want to say that the New York territory, it was a quote unquote syndicate that ran it. I think Toots Mond was part of that. I forget some of the names, but when they got elderly and began to not pay as much attention to the business, and the business started slacking off, and that's when Senior came in. But Senior's big attraction, he had two superstars, Bruno Sammartino and Andre the Giant.
Yes.
He never booked Bruno out of the territory, except every now and then Bruno would end up wrestling in St. Louis for,
yes, sir.
And
didn't get over in St. Louis.
No, not at all. And again, Bruno, they said the biggest town Bruno was over in was Pittsburgh, not even New York. The biggest town that Bruno drew was Pittsburgh, which was his hometown.
But he was over with the Italian population in New York City for sure.
That's what I wanted to bring up about Vince's Senior's territory. All of his people on top, because New York's a melting pot. So his top stars were Puerto Rican, Italian, Irish, Indian. I mean, he took them all. But again, I lived in Hartford by God, Connecticut, 1977, and into 1978. And I lived there for a year, or right at a year. And one of the first things I did, the first month we were up there, we drove to Springfield, Massachusetts on a Wednesday night to see a wrestling match of the WWWF, 3 W's and the F. And in town was Ivan Putski, the Polish Power, was Chief Wahoo, not Wahoo, but Chief Jay Strongbow, and Pedro Morales. I mean, we saw the names, and Bruno was on top. And my son was 2 years old at the time. We sat about 20 rows from ringside. My wife and Chris had been brought up on at the time, had been brought up on wrestling, but it was slow.
Yes,
it was more Olympic style. It was holds. It wasn't, if somebody left their feet, somebody else was slamming them. Let's put it that way. Didn't see a drop kick, that kind of thing. But the thing that scared the living daylights out of me is the main event was Putski got screwed by his opponent, and he was the big baby face. And I want to say it was for the Intercontinental or the whatever championship, but it wasn't the big one, but it wasn't because Sammartino had the belt. But beer bottles, they served beer at the Springfield Coliseum in Springfield, Massachusetts. They served beer in beer bottles at a wrestling match. And when Putski got screwed in the match, I had to put Chris under my chair and put my wife's across me and then bend over to keep getting hit from beer bottles, because people were throwing beer bottles from the balcony, and that was dangerous. So needless to say, we didn't go back, but you know, that was his style of wrestling, and that was it. Vincent Kennedy McMahon, Vince Jr., when he bought it, his big thing first was to get on TV, and big TVs everywhere, WOR, the Superstation, Channel 5 out of Boston, to get on and spread his web via national TV. And at that time, the cable systems were starting to crank up, and you had superstations, and that's how Vince sort of built his power. But Vince, I mean, since then, the days of that and the days of now are totally daylight and dark.
There's no doubt about that. So did you say everything you wanted to say about Vince Kennedy McMahon?
Oh, yes. We're to a point where you can move on.
Okay. All right. Very good. The next person I want to talk about from the AWA is Verne Gagne. Verne Gagne was born in 1926. He passed away in 2015 at age 69 years old. Back before me, maybe even before Michael was even watching wrestling, I am not sure, the Dumont Network produced television, and Verne was one of the early stars. Verne Gagne was a football player and a wrestler and a All-American and a big background. There's a great picture of Verne Gagne now, many times holder of the AWA world title. Once the Dumont Network went away, Verne from Minneapolis went to Minnesota, bought into the company, and at the same time, Verne Gagne was the local hero, and he ended up taking over the company. The wrestling there in the AWA in the ring was so much slower. Verne started, well, you could name the list of people that he started and trained into wrestling. I'm certainly very, very impressive, Michael, and there's no doubt about that. But that wrestling was, they would do like, they had so many big markets they ran, and they would run maybe 2 angles a year, where Memphis would sometime run 4 angles a TV show. You know, it was a whole different situation. Their promos, they had people like Mad Dog Vachon and the Crusher, and the promos were just tremendous. Verne, successful money drawing wrestler, and also that territory. Would you say that as far as money territories, the boys talking money territories, you would say New York #1? Would you say Verne in the United States during his glory days would be the second most place that the all talent would want to go, or do you disagree with that comment?
I'm not sure that that was the case. I know, because it was a lightly run territory. They were on monthly towns, where most of the other territories, or a lot of the other territories, were weekly towns. I always heard that Florida was a money bed, and so I don't think you can discount Eddie Graham there. The difference,
I've always heard Florida was not a money territory.
Really,
I always heard overall that he would take care of his top stars like Dusty, but overall, Florida was not, you know, that's one thing. Nick, when he ended up going to Verne Gagne and working in the AWA as tag team partners with Ray Stevens, and they were AWA tag team champions. Then he became world champion, and he would never go anywhere, even though that he had the option to go to the NWA and maybe get a world championship. But he thought, I'm work maybe 3 times a month, 4 times a month, and I'm making just as much money as Harley Race or Dory Funk Jr. or Terry Funk or Jack Briscoe is. So yeah, I know for a fact, back in the glory days, Verne's territory, Michael, was a money pit. It was a good territory.
First of all, I'm going to quote Johnny Randolph, who gave me great advice as a young radio kid when I was in college. You can be a big fish in a small pond, or you can be a small fish in the big pond. And it's better when you're the big fish in the small pond. And that's sort of where Jarrett ended up in his career. That's where Nick Bockwinkel ended up with his career, staying close to what was feeding them, if you would. The difference between Verne Gagne and Vince McMahon as promoters, Vince McMahon Sr. and Verne was a wrestler. He was an Olympic wrestler. Or I don't think he was Olympic, but he was an amateur wrestler. He came up through, he's a bodybuilder. He came up through being one of the boys, and therefore he ran the territory. It was very talent centric. Whereas Vincent McMahon Sr. was a businessman. He was never a professional wrestler. a wrestler. So he hired talent based on their performance and was not as talent centric. The difference in the style, I always thought that those styles of Memphis of New York and AWA or AWA, the AWA were pretty similar.
I agree.
But you had more amateur talent in the Minneapolis territory than you did in the New York territory. You had more flamboyance. And again, Vince McMahon Sr. used a lot of talent to reflect the neighborhood, quote unquote, New England, New York, all the way down to Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia. Those were ethnic cities. So his wrestlers were ethnic wrestlers. In the Midwest, that's good old white boys. I mean, and that was the talent. You had some pockets. Detroit, Bobo Brazil, big talent in Detroit. But look at the makeup of the demographics of Detroit. Bobo Brazil should have been a big star in Detroit. But between AWA and the WWF back in the day, similar in style, but different in philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Bill, big time, no doubt about that. Folks, I think, Michael, this is the hottest, most response we've ever had. They keep going at us, and I'm obviously don't want to interrupt you, or you don't want to interrupt.
Wayne and Al Tuttle and Scott and Frank, they've all been right here with us, so that's pretty cool. So now Brian Thomas Lynch said that Verne was 89 when he died, not 69. I think he's correct. Because I remember when I first met Verne.
I just read it wrong. It was 89. It was 89.
I met him when he was 79 or 80, and he was still in good health. I mean, still in good look. I mean, still had a look about him.
Back to the comments. We can't address everybody, and wish we could, but we have a huge show today. Adam will acknowledge everybody by putting the most of the comments up on the board. Right now, we'll talk about championship wrestling from Florida. We will talk about Eddie Graham. Eddie passed away at 55 years old due to suicide. He's one of the most respected people, certainly. And when you talk about wrestling bookers, there's a lot of people that he taught. He taught Bill Watts. He was a mentor to Jerry Jarrett. Jerry Jarrett really respected Eddie Graham, and again talked about the money there, and it wasn't an easy territory. However, they didn't have to do all the driving like the Tennessee territory was basically driving. They flew some. Obviously, that Bobby Shane plane wreck that he lost his life, but Eddie Graham, very, very respected. And when we talk about the NWA, this is the first NWA promoter that we're talking about, Michael, and Eddie Graham was past president of the NWA. Again, he passed away in 1985. Your quick thoughts on Eddie Graham?
Met him one time when I was growing up. One of the most intriguing wrestling tag teams I always wanted to see and would catch him every now and then on TV or via tape or whatever was Eddie and Crazy Luke Graham. And actually it was Eddie and Dr. Jerry Graham. And met Dr. Jerry right before he passed. Big guy. I mean, big guy. Luke, I had the chance to work with. I don't think he was part of the family. I think he was a guy from Georgia that took the name. And but he was sort of, I think that's where the Roughhouse Fargo angle came in, is because Crazy Luke was always acting crazy in and out of the ring. But Eddie, and the time I met Eddie, believe it or not, I was introduced to Eddie Graham by Jerry Jarrett. And it was at an event. I'm trying to think, it may have been at Jerry's house. And I thought Eddie was a very classy guy. For an ex-wrestler, he carried himself well. He dressed well, spoke well. And I could see where Jerry Jarrett would look up to him as a mentor type. And Eddie Graham was very, very influential in getting Jerry's territory accepted by Sam Munchnick and getting it into that NWA collective back then.
And I like the TV, and one of the things that he did, because I think, because we certainly were Memphis guys, and we'll put over Lance Russell. Gordon Soley was to Championship Wrestling from Florida and Georgia Championship Wrestling like Lance Russell was to Memphis. I think that certainly Eddie Graham's style was different than the Memphis style, no doubt about it. It had some similarities, but Eddie Graham liked the tough guys too, and he liked the amateurs. Obviously, one of his people he mentored was Jack Briscoe, and he liked Bob Roop, and he liked a lot of those guys as well. But he would also go kind of with Professor Boris Malenko and different people. So he would be more violent and more out there than, say, a Verne Gagne would or a Vince McMahon would, correct?
That's what I was about to bring that up. So you really brought it up already. I thought there was more blood in the Florida territory than just about anywhere. You would see more juice on Florida and Florida Championship Wrestling from Florida and some of the tapes back then. You would see a lot of boys, like you said, it was almost a brawl type of style, which of course worked in Memphis very, very well. One of the wrestlers that did really, really well in Florida, and he did okay elsewhere, was Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan was one of the biggest heels in the history of Florida. Yes. And he went from the dark side to being, Kevin Sullivan made a lot of money, or he made a big name for himself, and I take it he made a lot of money in Florida. One of the things too about Florida, and it's really funny because we talked about the people on top. You mentioned Bockwinkel, and of course Verne Gagne himself in Minneapolis. We mentioned Andre and Bruno in New York. In Florida, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, was
nobody
the big star.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Again, we're just kind of quickly talking about these promoters, and each one of these promoters could deserve, and we could fill 2 hours on each guys. I want to talk about the tri-state area, and I want to talk about the Oklahoma area that ended up expanding to Louisiana and then other states. But the first person, a former NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion, his name was Leroy McGurk. Leroy McGurk was born in 1910. He died in 1988 at age 77 years old. He had a car wreck and he was blinded. And he at one time would do the color commentary of his television shows, and he was blind. He couldn't see the matches, but he would do the color commentary. It's the damnedest thing that I've ever seen in my life. But Leroy McGurk took over that promotion. He became partners with his top babyface and his top star, Cowboy Bill Watts. Cowboy Bill Watts was born in 1939. He is currently 83 years old. He's a big former football player and former college wrestler, a big bad son of a gun, ended up buying out Leroy McGurk. This became a huge territory. Now, that was great when it was on fire. When it was struggling, like all territories do, because it's a cyclical business, that was a rough-ass territory to travel in, one of the toughest there was. There's no doubt about it, because they had Jackson, Mississippi, and Greenville, Mississippi, and Greenwood, Mississippi, and they had Little Rock, Arkansas, and they had Tulsa and Oklahoma City. They had New Orleans, Louisiana, where they started the concept of the big show and running several times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, the Superdome. Then we'll talk about Houston a little bit later, and let's go ahead and do that and throw it into the Oklahoma, because eventually Bill Watts made a deal with Paul Boesh in Houston. Houston was a promotion run by former wrestler Paul Boesh. He was born in 1912, passed away in 1989 at 76 years old. and he was one of the most, him and Sam was one of the most respected promoters out there. But certainly Bill Watts kind of merged with Paul, and Paul was still the promoter, and it was still his town. And an interesting thing, and Michael might help me think of more, Houston wasn't a territory. It was a one-town territory, just like St. Louis was a one-town territory. I'm throwing a lot at you. Sam Munchnick was born in 1905. The president of the NWA, Sam Munchnick, he passed away in 1998 at 93 years old. Long time, hopefully we can find that picture, long time president Sam Munchnick of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, and he's just probably the most respected promoter. And one of the, there's the picture. He's a former sports writer, covered the St. Louis Cardinals, ran his wrestling promotion.
I know he covered the St. Louis Browns.
St. Louis Browns.
St. Louis Browns. They moved to Baltimore, and they asked the team wanted him to move to Baltimore and work for the Baltimore Sun, which was owned by the same people that owned the Post-Dispatch in St. Louis, and he refused to move. So they basically told him, you don't have a beat, you don't have a job. And that's how he got involved. There was a guy, a local guy running St. Louis wrestling. He ended up basically blackmailing the guy. He blackmailed him. Yeah. He told him, he said, you know, either you sell me your territory or let me in, or I'm going to write an article and expose the business. And that's how the NWA started. I think it's one of the most classic stories in the history of sports in America, was how the National Wrestling Alliance started. It started as a blackball threat by a writer that was well respected, and they knew if they didn't play ball, quote unquote, play ball with Sam Munchnick, it was going to be and back then, the last thing they wanted to do was expose the business. Now, because they've exposed the business, it's bigger than it ever was. Explain that one, Randy.
I can't for sure. So let's back up real quick, and quick thoughts here, please, Michael. Leroy McGurk, Bill Watts.
Did not know Leroy McGurk. Had heard the stories. Bill Watts, I met one time. I thought Bill was sort of condescending. He was a big guy, and he acted like a bully kind of guy. Yeah. So, but Bill Dundee chopped him down to size and rebirthed his territory. He was dead in the water had it not been for Bill Dundee.
He would have gone out of business then. At least Bill Watts. Now, when Bill Dundee went down, can you imagine this? When Bill Dundee went down and started that satellite territory for Atlanta and Chattanooga, Ole Anderson hated everything he was doing. Now, I've always said that instead of taking Dundee and Chattanooga, not the best crew, they had that TBS television. Can you imagine that Aiken, the Rock and Roll Express and the Express, and Terry Taylor, Jim Cornette, and everybody? But Ole didn't get the vision. Bill Watts, you have to give credit to him because he got the vision and let Bill Dundee do Memphis style stuff. So certainly we talked about Leroy, we talked about Bill Watts. Sam Munchnick might be the most historically influential and important promoter there was. And one more that I want to throw in that same loop, because St. Louis and Kansas City, 150, 200 miles apart? You'll know exactly.
140 miles, 139 miles apart.
So they were close together, and Bob Geigel and the Kansas City promotion had the opposite reputation of Sam Munchnick. Bob Geigel ran the Kansas City promotions, the Central States area. He was born in 1924, passed away in 2014 at an age 90 years old. One of the most knocked promotions, as far, it didn't cover a lot of territory, and you know, it's just not a good reputation at all for payoffs. So Sam Munchnick would use one of their top talents. Pat O'Connor, former NWA world champion, was Sam Munchnick's booker in St. Louis for a lot of years. He was also a partner in the Kansas City promotion. So I'm lumping those together. And the one last comment, just like Houston, St. Louis wasn't a territory. It was a standalone territory. You know more about it than I do. You can talk about Wrestling at the Chase. I believe Kill Auditorium, and I believe most of the time it was a Friday night town, and the television was a Sunday morning. So just thoughts, because this is the one Michael St. John will get fired up and excited talking about Sam Munchnick right now.
Well, St. Louis wrestling, I lived in St. Louis at the very end of the St. Louis Wrestling Club, and Wrestling at the Chase, they closed down. The only reason Wrestling at the Chase went away is they closed the hotel. The wrestling show was doing great. The hotel went to pot. And it's on the east side of Forest Park, right there on Grand, not there on, is it Grand Avenue? Anyway, right on the east side of the park. And they had a great announcer. Sam Munchnick had, let me think of his name, Larry Matzik, as his announcer. I always respected him, Larry. In fact,
he was good.
There were people that used to say that I was another, not that I could fill his shoes, but that my style was very close to his style, whatever the case may be. And Larry was a sportscaster. So not only a wrestling commentator, as a sportscaster, because he did baseball and he did football and he did basketball when the St. Louis Blues were in town and that kind of stuff. So Larry had a sports background. But you mentioned Bob Geigel. There was a lot of talent exchange between the St. Louis, and even though St. Louis wasn't, quote, a territory, St. Louis and Sam would run other towns around St. Louis, a la, I guess you would call them spot shows, towns like Quincy, Illinois. He'd run Chesterfield, Missouri, which at that time was not a suburb. It was outside of the Beltway of St. Louis, the freeway that circled St. Louis. He'd run south a little bit down to Cape Girardeau and some of those areas. So there were other towns over in Illinois a bit. So there were some other towns that there were shows in, but it was St. Louis TV and a St. Louis-centric show. He would run the Keel, the old Keel Auditorium, which was right next to Union Station, downtown St. Louis, right there on the same street, right down the street. I went in, it had closed when I first went to St. Louis in 1992. I actually got somebody to take me inside the Keel. I stood up from where they would shoot TV and look down. It was a great arena for wrestling or boxing. It was perfect. But the new Keel, of course, is the auditorium where the Blues play, or the arena where the Blues. It's huge, and it's, you know, it's sort of like
state of the art
forum oh, absolutely, like the FedEx Forum in Memphis. But on the big shows, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this, he would run the St. Louis Coliseum. And that was it looked like an old, oh, Jesus, like an old army hangar or an airport hangar. But it was an oval shape. I never forget, I saw Van Halen play there. And the thing that I was most impressed with, there was a cat that lived in that building and had lived there for over 18 years. And all the groups would come through town and play that arena. And it was old and musty and broken down, sort of like a sportatorium on steroids. And the cat was the cool thing. And he was called Spark, and it had half a tail and it ate like a horse. And anyway, it's a great story. But Wrestling at the Chase was the hotel. And they actually turned the ballroom. They put the wrestling ring in the ballroom, and that would be the where they do TV. A lot of people didn't realize that it had a low ceiling, so that prevented people from going to the top rope and leaping off, because you're going to hit your head on the ceiling. So the Chase ballroom at the hotel was just that. It was a ballroom for events. But like you said, they did run some Saturday TVs and then some Sunday afternoon tapings, but Wrestling at the Chase was a big to-do. The best part about Wrestling at the Chase, number one, when it was on Sunday, people would show up for the matches in their church clothes. So it was the only arena that I'd ever been aware of, or in America, where people would come dressed up for a TV wrestling show.
I mean, the women in evening gowns, again, Sam Munchnick and Paul Boesh had reputations of being, especially Sam, what a payoff guy he was, and brought a lot of people throughout the years. And we'll do a show sometime on St. Louis. Larry put out a book, Wrestling at the Chase, that is a great thing. We're going to have to go rapid fire. It's 8:30, and we're going to try to get out of here at 9. I'm going to talk next, Michael. Again, this is rapid fire, and we're going to talk about the most imitated wrestling promoter in the history of the world. Oh my gosh, my boy. We're going to talk about James E. Barnett. James E. Barnett started promoting in Indianapolis. He had a hell of a run in Australia. It was World Championship Wrestling then. And then in the Atlanta Wrestling War of the early 70s, between Al and Gunkel and the established NWA office, James Barnett came in and took over that company. James E. Barnett, my boy. Jim Cornette does him great, but he was born in 1924, passed away in 2004, age 80 years old. Jim Barnett, and there he is. He's a charismatic type of a son of a gun. There's no doubt about it. Probably heard more Jim Barnett stories than we can certainly say on this, even though this is the internet. This is not using FCC guidelines and all that, but we don't want to go there. Anyway, James E. Barnett, heard some. Frank Morrell loved Jim Barnett. Jim Barnett actually, in probably early 70s, hired Jerry Jarrett as his booker. Jim Barnett wasn't a per se wrestling guy, couldn't give a finished or lay out a TV to save his life. He was a promoter, and he was pretty much behind the scenes. You didn't see him on his television. Real quick, a minute on James E. Barnett, my boy.
Well, the boys all called him, a lot of the promoters. In fact, I heard Jerry Jarrett say this. He was the P.T. Barnum of professional wrestling. And yes. I think that's a great description. But I was in Jerry Jarrett's office at his house one afternoon, and we're talking about, I forget what we were talking about. And the phone rang, and it was Jim Barnett. And he put him on speakerphone. And he had this sort of voice. And I can't do the voice. But one of my favorite stories I've heard is one of the wrestlers, and it may have been Paul Jones, one of the wrestlers that was down in Atlanta when the Superstation started to get rolling and they were taping at Turner, was in the locker room and would do Jim Barnett imitations when Jim Barnett wasn't around.
Right.
And he was into the middle of this, and all of a sudden, all the boys in the room got quiet, and the guy's doing his imitation, and normally they're all heckling and laughing and doing whatever. So they got real quiet, and the guy's like still doing it. And he turns around, and standing in the doorway with his arms crossed was Jim Barnett. And instead of getting mad, or instead of getting PO'd or throwing the guy out or firing him or whatever, he just turned around and walked away. And nothing was ever said about that ever. He didn't say it. He didn't bring it up to the guy's attention or whatever. But I think that's a classic story about, some people would go off. Somebody's making fun of you. You'd go off on somebody making fun of you, but not Jim Barnett. He thought it was, it was promoting Jim Barnett. So classic promoter. I think Jim Barnett got caught up in the politics between Turner Television and when they were bought out by, I guess it was Warner's or the people that owned Six Flags or whatever the case was. And they got brought out. And I think he got crossways. It got in the crosshairs and it started losing its luster. And that was sort of the story of the demise of that part of Georgia Championship Wrestling. But everybody that was around Jim Barnett or worked for Jim Barnett or had anything to do with Jim Barnett has nothing but good things to say about him.
Especially Tommy Rich. Tommy Rich got his biggest push ever there. And certainly one of the funny stories that Jim Barnett would run meetings before shows with the talent. And one of the things, no matter whether it was Tommy Rich or some of the other young, maybe he said, boys, it's time. Give old Jimmy the rat report. He wanted the arena rat report from who was screwing who and what girls were running around. It was just a different business. We're going to go ahead.
Jim Barnett was an alternative lifestyle guy.
Yes.
If you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
So, but he enjoyed, like you said, the rat report. Hearing Ricky Morton tell some great stories about the rat reports.
Do what now?
Ricky Morton tells some great stories about the rat reports.
Yeah, I'm sure Ricky was one of the ones that would say it. And yeah, Ron, one of the things you're saying, the only bad thing about said about Jim Barnett was from a former NFL player, Jim Wilson, that wrote a tell-it-all book, and that was bad as well. We'll move to Texas, and a guy that was a hell of a heel, man, and a hell of a talent. He switched babyface, became a promoter, tremendous, that ended up with one of the most tragic stories in the history of wrestling. It was the Dallas territory, the world-class territory. It was Fritz von Erich, born in 1929, passed away in 1993 at age 68 years old. At one time in the 80s with world class and their syndication, then they had one of the most progressive television programs, just did things different in the Freebird Von Erich feud and all that came with it. And as a talent, this Fritz Von Erich had worked for Vincent James McMahon back in the WWF, was a top heel all over the country, but just a tremendous story with probably the most tragic personal family relationship in the history, not just wrestling, anything. Thoughts on Fritz Von Erich? Did you ever meet him?
I only met him once. Met him at the Sportatorium when right after Jerry had bought the company, and we were going down there. At that time, he was elderly, and you could tell that the tragedy had taken its toll. You know, that territory was red hot. I mean, red hot. There wasn't probably a hotter territory in America when it was hot, but it was hot because of the boys, because of the Von Erich boys. And Fritz, as a wrestler back before, you know, he worked a lot, and he worked a lot in Houston. I know for I guess Paul Boesh and his
and he also worked for Sam.
For Sam, exactly. He would work St. Louis. And the Iron Claw. Baron Van Ratschke did not come up with the Iron Claw. That was Fritz Von Erich, the Iron Claw. And he was, you talk about a heel. He looked the heel part. He talked a heel promo. He could kick butt on a heel promo. And there's no doubt about it. Biggest heel in that area. One of the biggest heels in the history of wrestling, in my opinion, in America. But as a promoter, he had good matches. He knew his territory. He knew his fans, and he gave the fans what he wanted. But those good-looking boys, the Von Erich boys, they were the stars of the show, and they got so big so quick. You know, I always heard the phrase when living in Los Angeles: cocaine is God's way of telling you make too much money. Well, if that's the case, I don't know what heroin is, but those guys, you know, and from a family standpoint, I always heard that it was a religious family. They had great faith. The mom was a good mom. Fritz was a good, if not doting dad. The boys loved their dad. You never heard the boys say anything bad about their dad. But how many, was it 4 or 5 of them died from things that were related to drugs?
Well, let's go ahead and explain, Michael. Let's go before that, and I might get the names wrong, but certainly we know David, and we know Mike, and we know Chris, and we know Carrie. You know, the only one out of all the kids that were wrestlers that didn't die a tragic death was Kevin Von Erich. He just got lucky because the ones that I dealt with, he was the wildest one of the bunch. But early on, the very first death, I believe, was his name, because Fritz Von Erich's real name is Jack Atkinson, and had a son, and I think it was Jack Jr., and he got electrocuted. Is that
got electrocuted? Yeah.
Story. Yeah. So it's and that's a tragedy. Nothing to do at all with wrestling or with drugs or anything else. Just a kid, but just the whole story. And there's been documentaries and a sad thing, and like a lot of fathers do, apparently, as we get into the wrestlers that passed away, Fritz didn't want to see it or didn't see it and didn't do anything about it at all. Just a tragedy, Michael.
Well, I think the boys were close. And the things I always heard, Eric Embry used to tell a great story about how close the Von Erich brothers were. And that when they found him dead in the hotel room in Japan. And I thought Dark Side of the Ring, that was one of the few episodes that I think the Dark Side of the Ring really bought the cow and didn't drink the milk, was that they made the David Von Erich thing look like it was something perhaps physical he had wrong with him. But all the boys say he was high as a kite that night, and he ended up going to bed and not waking up. And, but those boys were so tight and so close. I don't know if Fritz really knew what was going on, because the boys kept it amongst themselves.
And they would cover for each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just one of the major tragedies there is, the whole Von Erich thing. But Fritz Von Erich was a great promoter and a great wrestling talent. We want to move. I'm just going to mention this, and Adam, don't even look for this because I forgot it and I didn't put. And Greg, if you want to throw something on this, Texas had the Dallas territory, Houston as a city. They had Southwest Championship Wrestling in San Antonio. Joe Blanchard. And I did not research Joe Blanchard, Tully's father. So Greg or Adam or somebody, if we can get a Joe Blanchard situation. And this state of Texas had the Dallas territory, Houston as a town, San Antonio, and it also had a very respected territory that I don't know a lot about, except the stars of the promotion, legendary former world champions, without a doubt in the world. Let me backtrack. Bob Geigel, Eddie Graham, and Jim Barnett, all people that we've talked about that were NWA presidents. But I'm talking about the Amarillo territory, Dory Funk Jr., Dory Funk Sr., and there's a picture of, great job there. There's a picture of Tully Blanchard's dad, who became the promoter for Southwest and in San Antonio, Joe Blanchard. Great job. Fantastic.
I saw some film of him working. He was a great technical wrestler. Joe Blanchard was a great technical wrestler, and then had the San Antonio territory. And you got to realize Texas is huge. I mean, you can put half the country, I think, in Texas. It's huge. And the territories were so distant from each other that the TVs didn't get involved in anybody else's market. I love that Amarillo story, because Amarillo was one of the smallest town territories in all of the NWA and drew some of the biggest money. And again, the Funks with the Funk family was out there. Some of the other big stars emanated from out there, and I can't recall some of the names, but I know they always had
Dick Murdoch,
Dirty Dutch Mantel, not the Dirty Dutch Mantel we know, but the original. I mean, there was some big stars. And again, you can be a big fish in a small pond, and that's what those guys were in Amarillo. But they drew money, and people absolutely bought into what they did.
Dory Funk Jr., Eddie Graham were big buddies, and they had feuds along the time, but they were big pals. Dory Funk Jr. passed away after wrestling in his living room with some wrestler on his roster, and I don't remember who the wrestler was. Michael, you might remember, but he died in 1973 at age 54. Any comments about that? The early death of Dory Funk, and of course, Dory Jr. and Terry inherited that company. They sold to Dick Murdoch and Blackjack Mulligan. Any quick words as we
I always
have
heard that
15
Dory
minutes
Jr.
left in the show?
I always heard that Dory Jr. had a massive heart attack.
Dory Sr.
Dory Sr. rather had a massive heart attack
after shooting with somebody. And there's
Mhm.
a picture of Dory Sr. right there. Was shooting with somebody.
Boy, does that not look like Terry Funk or what?
Oh, I'm telling you.
But yeah, that he was, and he was well respected. He was also a teacher. He was sort of like the guy up the Hart family up in Canada, that a lot of boys went to Amarillo to learn to wrestle.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was part
a
of
lot of Japanese wrestlers.
And a lot of those Amarillo boys went over big in Japan. I mean, Terry Funk, they say, was one of the biggest American wrestling superstars in the history of Japanese wrestling.
No doubt. There's absolutely no doubt at all. We're going to move from Texas to another big state. We're going to move to the state of California. Now, California had two different offices. It had the Los Angeles office, and I have no backup for this at all. As far as graphics or pictures, the Los Angeles area was promoted by Mike LaBelle, and he passed away in 2009. They ran the Olympic Auditorium there. The famous Freddie Blassie, John Tolos feud, where John Tolos blinded Freddie Blassie, and it did big money. On the other end of the state, Roy Shires. Now, he was a wrestler that teamed with a wrestler that he called his brother, Ray Shire, and Roy Shire. And Ray Shire was Ray Stevens. And Ray Stevens, Pat Patterson, both top stars. Roy Shire, when he opened up his own promotion in California, you couldn't wrestle and promote at the same time. And so Ray Stevens, the big star, Pat Patterson, the big star, Roy Shire obviously heard a lot of stuff that he was an asshole, he was a prick, but he was a brilliant booker and a tough son of a gun. Roy Shire, real quick, and Mike LaBelle.
Well, Mike LaBelle, I know a little bit about the LA territory. The LA territory really started out as down in Hollywood, in the center of Hollywood. They taped their shows down at Channel 5, and it started out right after World War II, about the same time the NWA was developed and was starting to be a hot territory, but it got very ethnic. And the LA territory turned into a very Hispanic-oriented territory. Jose Lothario, Pepper Gomez, they had some great stars out there that were Hispanic wrestlers, and it went from being sort of mainstream to being a very Hispanic kind of thing in LA. And it was on KCAL Channel 9, then it went over to the Spanish TV station, which was a UHF. So it was an interesting scenario in LA. Never got as big in LA, although they had some big cards, and they drew big at the Olympic, which is over by USC downtown, not far from Watts. The Olympic is a classic, one of those classic 1930, 1940 buildings that they renovated that's just fabulous in this day and time. But anyway, San Francisco was more the hotbed for whatever reason. They wrestled at the Cow Palace, which was an easy to get to. You know, San Francisco had one of the first freeways in LA, and it was easy
in California.
In California, yes, I'm sorry, in California. And it was easy to get to the Cow Palace because it had its own exit, and it had a huge parking. So people would flock to the Cow Palace, and to this day, it's still it was a lot sort of like the Olympic, and till today, it's still will host events of wrestling and boxing and MMA and that sort of thing. Ron Crowder says the Olympic is a church now. The Olympic auditorium that I knew was over off Olympic Boulevard over by USC. So that may be another arena, but the Olympic auditorium is, in fact, they had the Grammys at the Olympic while I was living out there in the 90s. So anyway, but the Cow Palace was the palace. I mean, it was a great place to wrestle. You also had a wrestling territory up in Portland.
And yeah, that's next. That's
okay,
next.
That's where we're going.
We'll talk about the Portland again. We got to go through these big time. Don Owens, a respected promotion. He was born in 1912, passed away in 2002 at 90 years old, and that's a picture of Don Owens. Michael?
Dutch Mantell, I think, started out there or worked for Don Owens, because I can remember Dutch telling great stories about the guy, what a classy guy he was. He ran it like a business. The Portland area, of course, Oregon's an interesting state. Portland is very a metropolis kind of thing. It reminds me a lot of a Nashville or a Charlotte or those kind of cities. It's at one time was a beautiful city, although I understand now it's not as pretty. It used to be called the Rose City. I used to consult K-Duck in over where the University of Oregon was, a radio station there, and would fly in and out of Portland, and always didn't spend a lot of time in Portland, but liked it, but always heard good things about Portland wrestling. A lot of people back in the day would also compare Portland to Nashville, to the Nick Gulish, Roy Welch territory for the style and the type of wrestling that was done out there.
Very good. Just amazing, all these territories, all these promoters. We're going to talk about right now the next two. One time, Michael, I want to do a show on the most feared people in professional wrestling history. In Memphis, I think you would have to say Mongolian Stomper and Joe LeDuc. But here's two that's just absolutely just thinking about them. The first person I'll talk about, the Indianapolis territory, and that's former football player Dick the Bruiser, born in 1921, passed away in 1991, age 62. Real quick thoughts about Dick the Bruiser.
You know, I Dick the Bruiser had the look. I mean, he just looked like a heel, and he acted like a heel. And there's a great picture of Dick, and his he and the Crusher, the Bruiser and the Crusher were legendary in Indianapolis and Detroit and all that area. And Dick ran Detroit at one time in that Cleveland area. And I think that before the Sheik sort of took over up there, the Sheik was an interesting situation because he was the star and on top in the territory, and then he ended up with the territory. And I think that was sort of kind of the same situation that Dick the Bruiser had, because didn't Dick also run part of the Chicago territory when Jim Barnett was up in that area?
Yes, absolutely. And later, we'll get into that in a minute. Certainly, Wilbur Snyder and Dick the Bruiser were partners, and at one time they ran Louisville, and then they shut it down because it was not doing good. And then Jerry Jarrett opened it. Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder, Jerry Jarrett told me this story, ended up at the Louisville Gardens the first time they ran it, and basically threatened them and that sort of thing, and ended up had to pay Dick the Bruiser a fee every week. That's a crazy story, Michael.
That is a crazy story. I know Jimmy Cornette has told some of those stories of the TVs that Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder. Who was the wrestler that wrestled with Wilbur Snyder as a tag team? It wasn't Bruiser, and they were at one time they were the NWA World Tag Team Champions, and I saw a tape of them in St. Louis defending the title at the Keel.
Somebody needs to
help me out. It was somebody, some so-and-so in Wilbur Snyder, and I can't think of that first guy's name. But it was interesting that, Bruiser was a guy that he was a wrestler's wrestler, but wasn't a good businessman. Everybody said that about, and I think he and Wilbur Snyder just sort of they ran it, but it wasn't a huge money maker for them because they just weren't business people.
One of the in Japan, Wilbur Snyder's tag team partner was Danny Hodge,
the world junior heavyweight champion for years in the DNWA. But it was somebody in Wilbur Snyder. And if you said the name, it
Dominic DeNucci.
No, not one Dominic DeNucci. Gosh, I can't think about it. I can't think of it. Rather, I'll look it up. Somebody help me out.
They were
the world tag team champions for the NWA at one time.
Again, we're running real late on time, and there's several more I want to get to. The Detroit territory, owned part of Toronto. Again, one of the most weird wrestlers in the history of mankind. He was born in 1926, passed away in 2003 at age 76 years old, and somebody that Michael St. John has strong feelings about, and even made trips with him. And that, of course, is the Sheik.
Yeah, I can remember my grandmother on my dad's side in Dayton, Ohio, standing in front of the television. She had a black and white TV growing up and shaking her fist about the Sheik when he had to throw the fire, and he would grab the pencil and the referee wouldn't see him, and he'd be gigging the hell out of his opponent. And then I got to meet him. He came in to try to help Nick, resurrect the territory after it was on its tail, and he hot-shotted the territory. And I had a chance. I was thrown into the situation of having to bring him back from a show here in Huntsville at the Von Braun Center when the Von Braun Center first opened, the first month of the Von Braun Center. And I'll never forget, my daughter was, Chris was 4, and my daughter was about 6 months old, and he's sitting in the back seat of my Cutlass, and my wife is shaking because she was scared to death of him. And then he started talking, and the more he talked, the more she liked him. And he asked about midway back to Nashville, he said, "Ma'am," he said, "can I hold your daughter?" He said, I love children. And he had a bunch of them,
right?
Several of which were adopted. And he held Jamie, and I think my ex thought he was going to bite her head off, but he didn't. And he was very kind and very gentle. And he started singing to her in Arabic. And he gave her back to, he only held her for a couple of minutes. He gave her back to, he says, she will grow up to be a beautiful young girl. He's very prophetic. But I always liked him. I took him, Nick sort of put me in charge of him to get him to Chattanooga and to get him to Huntsville and to take him to Bowling Green. And every trip was a lesson. He taught me a lot about the business. He taught me a lot about wrestling. And I've read his book, and I think Brian Solomon wrote that book. And I don't know Brian Solomon. I've heard him talk. I've heard him do on some podcasts. I'd like to meet him because I thought he did a masterful job on that book. That of all the wrestling books I've read, whether it's Jerry Lawler's book or the guy that was the manager, the Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls. I can remember the title. James J. Dillon. I've wrote. Eric Ole gave me his book and autographed it to me. I've read a bunch of wrestling books. The book on Buddy Rogers is very good, but I don't think one is as good and in depth in both the wrestling side and the personal side as what Brian Solomon did with the Sheik's book. I would totally recommend that to anybody.
We're going to move. We've gone from Tennessee to Florida. We've gone to New York. We've gone to Minnesota.
Tour the states.
We've gone all over. We're going to leave the states right now. The two most famous promoters, and that's not really true that I am aware of. There was a death of a Japanese wrestling promoter by the mob. Long story, but ended up with two promotions starting up. And those two promoters was Antonio Inoki, who was born in 1943, passed away in 2022 at age 79. And the Giant Baba, born in 1938, passed away in 1999, age 61 years old. Real quick, and we're way short of time. Real quick, Baba and Inoki.
Don't know a lot about Inoki. Baba, because of his match with Muhammad Ali, that was one of the biggest farces in the history of sports.
Inoki's the one that wrestled
Oh, it wasn't Baba? No, it was
No.
Inoki that wrestled. Inoki, wasn't it Inoki against Ali?
Yeah, that's what I thought you said. Baba did. It was
No,
Inoki.
no, I said I don't know a lot about Baba.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Inoki and Ali, one of the biggest farces in the history of sports. You know, I don't know a lot about Japanese wrestling. I've seen a little of it. I saw several tapes of Dory Funk, but apparently that was a great rivalry over in Japan for many years, or as to, you know, one would be popular and then the other one would get hot and then the other one would get hot. It went sort of back and forth from what I understand, but I'm not really qualified to talk about it.
And they've done, it's just different styles, and it's just tremendous knowing that. We'll briefly talk about Stu Hart, Calgary. They developed a lot of great talent, and Stu Hart was a character of all characters, born in 1915, passed away in 2003 at age 88 years old. His most famous sons, he had a huge family. His most famous sons were Brett and Owen Hart, and we'll, if I did upload it, hopefully Adam can put the picture of Stu Hart on the screen right now, and there he is right now, famous for the Dungeon. About 30 seconds on Stu Hart.
Wasn't he a known shooter? Wasn't he one of the original shooters in wrestling?
He thought he was. That kind of took advantage of guys at the Dungeon, is from what I understand. But I have no personal knowledge of that at all. He had the Dungeon there in Calgary.
It was in his basement of his house, and
yeah,
they slammed guys against the walls. I mean, it was a basement is what it was. And
he beat the shit out of Archie Gordy, the Mongolian
Stomper. Yeah, I'd heard that
but
story.
He kept coming back for more.
Exactly.
And finally he pushed him real good. So Calgary Stampede Wrestling there.
It was hot forever. It was hot forever up there.
Big time. Another hot territory was the Carolinas. And the Carolinas, a guy from both James part of Tennessee, Jim Crockett, around the tri-state area, Jim Crockett Sr. He ended up passing away pretty young at age 64. He was passed away in 1973. Jim Crockett, it was a tag team territory. Then his sons and the whole family inherited the company. They chose Jim Crockett Jr. to run it, and Jim Crockett Jr. was born in 44, died last year at 76 years old, going out to an island again, a place where Dutch Mantell spent a lot of time, and that is Puerto Rico. Carlos Colon, famous for being the owner of the promotion, that where Bruiser Brody was killed by the Booker. Obviously, terrible situation. Carlos Colon was born in 1948. He is currently 74 years old. It was called the Capital Sports at one time and World Wrestling Council for many, many years. And the last person we're going to talk about is somebody certainly from our part of the country, and that is the person that ran Southeastern Wrestling Knoxville, Southeastern Wrestling Birmingham, ended up with changing it to Continental Wrestling. Ron Fuller, and we have a picture, I think, of Ron, his brother Robert, and his dad Buddy Fuller. And I think that territory, the Southeastern Territory, did so many good stuff. And so I might not. There it is. That's in 1975, and that's on. That's Robert. Big Ron is the Southern champion in 75, and Buddy Fuller, who was the son of Roy Welch, who they've been promoting wrestling now for over 100 years. So just wrap it up with quick thoughts on the Crockett's and the Crockett territory, and Jimmy Crockett Jr. obviously changed it from a tag team territory to a single territory, just like Jerry Jarrett changed Memphis when he found Jerry Lawler. The Crockett's got on TBS television for a while, really gave Vince a run for the money, but they didn't have the staff to compete with them, and out they went and sold to WCW. So I want you to finish up talking about the Crockett's, Carlos Colon, and Ron Fuller. Here's my
First of all, I think we need to do a show about Carolina wrestling at some point and talk about the Carolinas and maybe even the end of the WCW when Jimmy Jr. got involved. Jim Crockett Jr. also owned baseball teams and owned and like Ron Fuller, I think, had a hockey team at one time as well.
Two of them, one in Nashville and then one in Cincinnati.
The Cyclones. Yeah. Somebody, and I think it was Kirkpatrick, mentioned that Leo Nomalini was the name I was looking for with Wilbur Snyder. They were the AWA World Tag Team Champions. And Leo Nomalini, a former defensive tackle for the San Francisco 49ers back in the early days, or the old days of the NFL. Crockett, well, like I said, we can do a whole show on that. Ron Fuller deserves a more than just lip service too, and Ron and Jerry Jarrett were very close and talked a lot. And of course there was family ties there that were involved, but I know when Ron was running Birmingham and doing TV in Dothan and working out of Pensacola and Mobiles with Roy Lee Welch and Jimmy Golden and some of those boys down there, Robert, of course, there was a lot of talent that went back and forth. In fact, that's where Jerry Jarrett got Austin Idol. Mike McCord, the American Austin Idol, the
Universal Heartthrob.
Universal Heartthrob. That's what I'm trying to think of. But I think that's worthy of a show down the road as well, with Continental and Southeastern, which was all sort of a part of that. And again, that territory stretched from Knoxville to Pensacola and Tallahassee. So there's a lot to talk about there. Carlos Colon, other than the talk from what the boys would tell me about Puerto Rico, I know the boys would love to go to Puerto Rico back in the day, like they'd go to Japan because it was a big payday, right? And they'd go to Japan.
Beautiful beaches.
Yep, and a big payday. I've been to Puerto Rico one day. Well, actually one night. Flew in on a Tuesday with a friend of mine, or actually somebody I worked with in Birmingham, because George Mooney had a radio station in San Juan. We were doing real well in Birmingham. He wanted to fix San Juan. He sent us down there. We turned the radio, and we got a cab, go into the hotel, turn the radio on, put it on that station, and couldn't understand a word they said. Right. So we booked a plane trip the day back, the next morning, and flew back to Atlanta and back to Birmingham because we couldn't help. I mean, we couldn't understand what they were saying, and they weren't playing American music, so there wasn't a lot we could do. So, but I always heard that it was a great payoff and that Carlos Colon treated his talent well.
Final thoughts about today's show, Michael St. John, and you will not be with us next week. You can smarten the people up on what you will be doing. I think a week in May also you're not going to be here, so just smarten people up. You will not be here next week.
I will not be here next week. I'll be in Louisville, Kentucky at the Gardens. No, actually, I will be at Churchill Downs. We're broadcasting live for the AT&T Morning Line, which is a radio program that is done in conjunction with the Kentucky Derby Festival and the State of Kentucky Department of Tourism. This will be our 17th year. My broadcast partner from the Arabian Night broadcast booth is going for the first time ever. I've invited him 16 years in a row. He's always had a reason not to go this year. He's our county commissioner. He's going, and we're going to have a great time doing it. But we do that, and it's always a big event. It'll be on Fun 92.7 FM, also on 104.9 FM in Decatur, and we will also simulcast it on our Tennessee stations, Fun 93.5 and 93.9 in Hartsville. You can hear it online, fun927.com, funradioal.com, and funradiotn.com. So that's where I'll be next Tuesday night. We'll be wrapping things up on our Wednesday thing, but I love the show. I love talking about the promoters. I mean, yeah, we shotgunned it, and we probably should have or could have done a couple of more shows on it.
I would have, but you're going next week, and
I appreciate you.
That's why I thought it would be better with you on here with me more than
I do have a final thought, and we didn't talk about it, but I'm going to say something that and I don't know if you'll agree with me, Randy, but I think the WWE turning Brock Lesnar on Cody Rhodes last Monday night and then the follow-up last night, I thought that was one of the best heel turns I have seen in years.
I did not see it, so I can't speak on it.
And he beat
but it sounded good.
Well, he beat the living to bejesus out of Cody Rhodes and sold it big for 10 minutes. And I think it's going to pay off for them. One other thought, and this is just a fleeting thought I meant to mention earlier. We were talking about the colorful wrestling commentary of Larry Matzik. I've always thought, and I've never heard wrestling on radio, but I would love to do play-by-play of wrestling on the radio, because I think you could build the story in people's minds even bigger than what it is on the screen when they see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Say goodbye, Michael.
Goodbye, Michael. Hey, Randy, thank you for everything. All the folks that are listening and watching, God love you. Great seeing you. Let's pray for our police officers. They need help. And let's pray that our people, that we as a society get back to sanity. That's all I ask. God bless, and thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Michael St. John. On the April 11th, this is the Tuesday after Easter, and we had a jam-packed show that I know we rushed, and we certainly did not get, and Adam did a real good job producing, as always, and Greg helped put some information out on a lot of these promoters, and that helped as well. Now it's time for the plugs. I will be on the front row with Bud Rowe tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time. The phone number for that is 870-930-3776. 870-930-3776. Front row with Bud Rowe, the Power Hour. Then we will be back Monday, and we will be back with the Power Hour, show number 61. It's a June show, probably June the 12th, and very exciting show. Lots going on. We enjoyed the Power Hour yesterday morning. Again, I want to thank everybody watching tonight. I want to thank Michael St. John. We miss Pat, and we also miss Chris Ellis, and Chris will return to the show for the first time in a long time next week. Again, catch me next time, and then whatever the next time will be that you can catch me. Until then, for Adam Dunn, Michael St. John, this is Randy Hills. Good night, everybody. Thanks so much for watching.
Talking Memphis Wrestling with Randy Hills and special guests.